The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of Miller's diner, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Sarah Jenkins tied her apron strings behind her back for what felt like the 1000th time, preparing for another long shift serving coffee and comfort food to the regular customers who frequented the small-town establishment. At 28, she had been working at the diner for nearly 6 years, ever since she moved to Millbrook after her divorce. Sarah had always been the type of person who noticed details others missed. It was a skill that served her well as a waitress, allowing her to anticipate customer needs and remember their preferences. Mrs. Henderson always wanted her coffee black with exactly 2 sugars. Tommy Rodriguez, the mechanic from down the street, preferred his eggs over easy with wheat toast. The traveling salesmen who stopped by on their routes through town usually ordered the daily special without even looking at the menu. This particular Tuesday morning started like any other. The breakfast rush was in full swing, with the familiar sounds of sizzling bacon, clinking dishes, and quiet conversation filling the air. Sarah moved efficiently between tables, her practiced smile genuine despite the early hour. She had learned long ago that treating each customer with kindness, regardless of their appearance or apparent wealth, was not only the right thing to do, but often led to better tips that helped her make ends meet. Around 10:30, after the morning rush had died down, the bell above the diner door chimed softly. Sarah looked up from wiping down a table to see a man she didn't recognize entering alone. He was tall and lean, probably in his early 40s, with graying temples that gave him a distinguished appearance. His clothes were simple but well-made: dark jeans, a navy blue sweater, and leather shoes that had seen some wear but were obviously expensive. What caught Sarah's attention immediately wasn't his understated elegance, but the way he carried himself. There was a quiet sadness about him, a heaviness in his shoulders that suggested someone carrying an invisible burden. His eyes, a deep brown that reminded her of coffee beans, held a distant look as if his mind was somewhere far away. The man chose a corner booth near the window, sliding in with his back to the wall so he could observe the rest of the diner. Sarah approached with her notepad and coffee pot, offering her usual warm greeting. "Good morning. Welcome to Miller's Diner. Can I start you off with some coffee?" He looked up at her, and for a moment, Sarah saw something flicker in his eyes: surprise, perhaps, or recognition of her genuine friendliness. "Coffee would be great, thank you. Black, please." As she poured the steaming liquid into his cup, Sarah noticed his hands. They were well manicured, but showed the subtle signs of someone who worked with their hands despite their obvious wealth. There was a simple gold wedding band on his left ring finger, worn smooth from years of wear. "Take your time looking over the menu," Sarah said, setting the coffee pot on the table momentarily. "Our special today is blueberry pancakes with maple sausage, and, I have to say, our cook makes them from scratch." The man smiled slightly, the first genuine expression she had seen from him. "That sounds perfect. And thank you for the recommendation. Of course, I'll get that started for you right away." As Sarah walked back to the kitchen to place the order, she found herself glancing back at the mysterious customer. He sat quietly, sipping his coffee and staring out the window at the small town's main street. There was something about him that intrigued her, not just his obvious wealth in a town where most people struggled to get by, but the profound sadness that seemed to emanate from him. When she returned with his breakfast, the man was rolling up his sleeves due to the warmth of the diner. That's when Sarah saw it: a tattoo on his left forearm that made her breath catch in her throat. It wasn't the presence of the tattoo that shocked her, but what it depicted. The tattoo was beautifully detailed and clearly expensive work. It showed a woman's portrait, rendered in stunning black and gray realism. The woman had kind eyes and a gentle smile, with her hair flowing softly around her face. But what made Sarah's heart skip a beat wasn't just the artistry. It was that she recognized the woman in the portrait. The woman in the tattoo was Elena Rodriguez, a local teacher who had died in a car accident 3 years ago. Sarah remembered Elena well because she had been one of her regular customers during the school year. Elena would come in every Tuesday and Thursday morning before school started, ordering herbal tea and wheat toast with honey. She had been one of the kindest people Sarah had ever met, always asking about Sarah's day and leaving generous tips despite her modest teacher's salary. Elena had been married to a man who worked in the city, someone Sarah had heard about, but never met. The townspeople had whispered that he was very successful in business, but Elena had always been modest about their lifestyle, driving an older car and wearing simple clothes. After Elena's death, her husband had apparently left town, unable to cope with the memories. Looking at the tattoo, Sarah realized she was staring at Elena's widower, the man who had loved Elena so much that he had her portrait permanently etched into his skin. The sadness in his eyes suddenly made perfect sense. "Your breakfast," Sarah managed to say, setting the plate down with slightly trembling hands. The man looked up at her, noticing her changed demeanor. "Is everything all right?" Sarah struggled with whether to say anything. Part of her wanted to tell him that she had known Elena, that his wife had been a regular customer and a source of light in many people's days. But another part of her wasn't sure if bringing up painful memories would be welcome. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "but I couldn't help but notice your tattoo. The artwork is beautiful." The man's expression shifted, a mixture of pain and something that might have been gratitude crossing his features. He looked down at his arm, then back at Sarah. "Thank you. It's of my wife. She was beautiful," Sarah said sincerely. "She was," he agreed, his voice soft. "In every way that mattered." Sarah felt a lump forming in her throat. "If you don't mind me asking, was her name Elena?" The man's eyes widened in surprise, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. He set it down carefully, studying Sarah's face with new interest. "You knew Elena?" "She used to come in here regularly," Sarah explained, her voice gentle. "Tuesday and Thursday mornings, always ordered herbal tea and wheat toast with honey. She was one of the nicest people I've ever met." For a long moment, the man said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "That sounds like her. She loved this place. She used to tell me about the friendly waitress who always remembered her order and asked about her students." Sarah felt tears pricking at her eyes. She talked about her students all the time. You could tell how much she loved teaching. Teaching was her passion, the man said, a sad smile playing at the corners of his mouth. She used to say that every child deserved someone who believed in them, especially the ones who came from difficult situations. "She mentioned you sometimes," Sarah said carefully. "She was so proud of you, though she never said exactly what you did for work. She just said you were incredibly generous and hardworking." The man chuckled softly, but there was no humor in it. "Elena was always humble about everything, including my success. She never wanted people to treat her differently because of money." Sarah nodded, understanding. She was just Elena, warm, kind, genuine. Money never seemed to matter to her. "It didn't," he confirmed. "She grew up with very little, and even after we married and things changed financially, she never lost sight of what was really important. People, relationships, making a difference, that's what mattered to Elena." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of shared memories filling the space between them. Sarah refilled his coffee without being asked, a gesture that seemed to touch him. "I'm sorry for your loss," Sarah said quietly. "I know it's been a few years, but I can't imagine that kind of pain ever really goes away." "Thank you," he replied. "It doesn't go away, but it changes. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. Coming back here, seeing places that were special to her. It's difficult, but somehow necessary." "You haven't been back since?" "Not to stay. I handled the funeral arrangements and sold our house. But I couldn't. I couldn't be here. Everything reminded me of her. Every street, every building, every face." He looked around the diner with new eyes. She loved this place so much. She used to say it felt like home. Sarah watched as he took a bite of his pancakes, and she could see him processing the familiar flavors and atmosphere that his wife had treasured. The simple act of eating breakfast in the same booth where Elena might have sat seemed to bring both comfort and pain. "What brought you back?" Sarah asked gently, sensing that he needed to talk, but not wanting to pry. The man was quiet for a long time, considering his answer. "I've been running from her memory for 3 years. Throwing myself into work, traveling, anything to avoid facing the fact that she's gone. But recently, I realized that running away from her memory means running away from the best parts of myself, the parts that she brought out and loved." He paused, looking down at the tattoo on his arm. I got this tattoo about a year after she died. I thought it would help me feel closer to her, but instead, it just reminded me of what I'd lost. I started wearing long sleeves all the time because I couldn't bear to look at it. But you're not covering it today, Sarah observed. No, he said, a hint of resolve in his voice. I'm trying to learn to live with the grief instead of running from it. Elena wouldn't want me to spend the rest of my life hiding from places and memories that made us happy. Sarah felt a deep admiration for this man who was clearly struggling with profound loss, but was trying to find his way back to the light. Elena always talked about how lucky she was. She said she'd found her person, someone who understood her completely and supported her dreams. I was the lucky one, he said firmly. Elena saw the world in ways I never could. She found joy in the smallest things and saw potential in everyone she met. She made me want to be better than I was. She had that effect on people, Sarah agreed. I remember one morning, I was having a particularly rough day. Bills were piling up, my car had broken down, and I was feeling pretty sorry for myself. Elena came in and could tell something was wrong. She didn't pry, but she left me the most encouraging note with her tip. Just a few words about how everyone goes through difficult seasons and how my kindness to customers made a difference in their days. The man smiled, and for the first time, it reached his eyes. That was Elena. She collected people's stories and genuinely cared about their struggles. She had this incredible ability to see the best in everyone. She saw the best in you too, Sarah said. Whatever success you've achieved, whatever good you've done in the world, she was proud to be part of it. As the morning wore on, other customers began filtering in for the lunch crowd. Sarah excused herself periodically to take care of other tables, but she kept returning to check on Elena's husband, whose name she still didn't know. Each time she came back, their conversation deepened. He told her about how he and Elena had met in college, how she had been studying education while he pursued business. He shared stories about their early years together when money was tight, but they were building dreams together. He spoke about Elena's dedication to her students and her involvement in community programs to help underprivileged children. Sarah found herself sharing, too, stories about Elena's regular visits, the way she always asked about other customers by name, and how she had once organized a fundraiser through the diner to help a local family whose house had burned down. I
What
never
is
knew
this
about
tattoo?
that.
It's
The man
nothing.
said,
Don't worry about it.
shaking
It
his
doesn't
head
look
in
like
wonder.
nothing. Tell
She
me the
never told
truth.
me. She was always doing things like that, helping people quietly, without expecting recognition. She said charity shouldn't be about recognition, Sarah remembered. She said if you were doing it for the right reasons, the only recognition you needed was knowing you'd made someone's day a little brighter. As the conversation continued, Sarah began to piece together just who this man might be. The expensive clothes, the references to success, the way he spoke about business ventures and investments, combined with Elena's modest pride in her husband's generosity, painted a picture of someone far wealthier than she had initially assumed. But it wasn't his wealth that impressed Sarah. It was his obvious and enduring love for Elena, the way his face lit up when he shared happy memories, and the genuine grief that hadn't diminished his fundamental goodness. This was a man who had loved deeply and was now learning to carry that love forward rather than being crushed by its absence. The lunch hour was approaching, and Sarah could see her manager giving her meaningful looks about spending so much time at one table. But something told her this conversation was important, not just for Elena's husband, but for her own understanding of love, loss, and resilience. As she prepared to suggest he might want to order lunch or perhaps head out before the restaurant got busier, the man looked at her with an expression of genuine gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply, "for sharing your memories of Elena, for treating her so well when she was alive, and for listening to mine today. I haven't talked about her like this in 3 years." "Thank you for sharing her with me," Sarah replied. "It's clear she was an amazing person, and it's equally clear how much you loved each other." The man nodded, then looked around the diner one more time with new appreciation. She was right about this place feeling like home. There's something special about places where people genuinely care about each other. As he prepared to leave, Sarah realized she still didn't know his name. But somehow, that seemed less important than the connection they had shared over their mutual love for Elena. Some encounters, she reflected, were about the moment rather than the ongoing relationship. But, as he stood to go, the man surprised her by extending his hand. "I'm David, by the way. David Morrison." Sarah shook his hand, noting the firm but gentle grip. "Sarah Jenkins. It was truly an honor to meet you, David." "The honor was mine," David replied. "Elena was right about you. You have a gift for making people feel seen and valued." 3 days had passed since David Morrison's visit to Miller's Diner, but Sarah couldn't stop thinking about their conversation. She found herself looking toward the corner booth where he had sat, remembering the way his face had softened when she mentioned Elena. There had been something profound about their exchange, a depth that went beyond the typical customer interaction she was used to having. On Friday morning, Sarah was refilling sugar dispensers when her manager, Frank Miller, approached her with an unusual expression. Frank was a heavy-set man in his 60s who had owned the diner for over 20 years. He was known for being straightforward and practical, someone who didn't get easily surprised or flustered. "Sarah," Frank said, his voice carrying a mixture of confusion and excitement, "I need to talk to you about something strange that happened yesterday." Sarah looked up from her task, noting the way Frank was fidgeting with his coffee-stained apron. "What's going on, Frank?" "Well, I got a call from some fancy law office downtown. Apparently, someone wants to discuss a significant investment opportunity related to our diner. They want to meet with me today at 2 o'clock. Sarah frowned, setting down the sugar dispenser. "That's odd. Did they say who was interested in investing?" "They were pretty secretive about it, but they mentioned that their client had recently visited our establishment and was impressed with the quality of service and community atmosphere." "Sound familiar?" A chill ran down Sarah's spine as she remembered David's parting words about Elena being right about the diner feeling like home. Did they mention anything else? Just that it was a legitimate opportunity that could benefit the entire community. "Sarah, I've been in business long enough to be suspicious of anything that sounds too good to be true, but something about this feels different." Frank paused, studying Sarah's face. "The lawyer specifically asked about you. Wanted to know how long you've been working here, what kind of person you were. I told him you were one of the best employees I'd ever had. Honest, hardworking, and genuinely cares about our customers." Sarah felt her heart racing. The timing seemed too coincidental to be unrelated to David's visit. "Frank, I think I might know who's behind this." She quickly told Frank about David Morrison's visit, their conversation about Elena, and the way he had seemed deeply moved by their discussion. Frank listened intently, his expression growing more serious as Sarah explained who David was and the emotional connection they had shared over his late wife's memory. "David Morrison," Frank repeated slowly. "That name sounds familiar, but I can't place it." "I looked him up after he left," Sarah admitted. "Frank, he's not just wealthy. He's one of the richest men in the state. He founded several tech companies and has a reputation for philanthropy, especially in education and community development." Frank's eyes widened. "And you think he's interested in investing in our little diner because of his conversation with you?" "I don't know for sure, but the timing is awfully suspicious. And you said they specifically asked about me." "They did. Very respectful, professional questions about your character and your role here." Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "Frank, what if this is real? What if he really wants to help because of Elena's connection to this place?" "I guess we'll find out this afternoon," Frank said. "Sarah, I want you here for that meeting. If this is connected to your conversation with him, you should be part of whatever discussion we're having." The rest of the morning dragged by slowly. Sarah found it difficult to concentrate on her usual tasks, her mind racing with possibilities. What could David Morrison want with a small-town diner? Was this some elaborate gesture connected to Elena's memory, or was there a business angle she couldn't see? At 2 o'clock sharp, a sleek black sedan pulled up outside Miller's Diner. Sarah watched through the window as a professionally dressed woman in her 30s emerged from the passenger seat, followed by David Morrison himself. Her breath caught seeing him again, this time in an expensive charcoal suit that transformed him from the casually dressed, grieving widower into someone who clearly commanded significant respect in business circles. Frank nervously adjusted his tie, one of only two he owned, and smoothed down his hair as the visitors entered the diner. Sarah had changed from her regular uniform into her best blouse and slacks, though she suddenly felt underdressed. "Mr. Miller?" the woman asked, extending a manicured hand. I'm Jennifer Chun, Mr. Morrison's attorney. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. Frank shook her hand, then turned to David with obvious uncertainty about the proper protocol for greeting a billionaire. David immediately put him at ease by extending his own hand with a warm smile. Mr. Miller, thank you for taking the time. I know this must seem unusual. It certainly does, Frank replied honestly. And, please, call me Frank. David's eyes found Sarah across the diner, and his smile became more genuine. Hello again, Sarah. I hope you don't mind that I came back so soon. Of course not, Sarah said, though her voice came out slightly higher than usual. It's good to see you again. Jennifer Chen looked between them with professional curiosity. I understand you two met earlier this week. We had a meaningful conversation about my late wife, David explained simply. Sarah knew Elena and shared some wonderful memories with me. Frank gestured toward a large corner booth that could accommodate all four of them. Should we sit down and discuss whatever it is you have in mind? As they settled into the booth, Sarah noticed that David seemed more composed than he had during his previous visit, though she could still see the underlying sadness in his eyes when he glanced around the diner. Jennifer Chen opened a leather portfolio and began the conversation in a professional but friendly tone. Mr. Morrison has asked me to explore the possibility of making a significant investment in your establishment. Before we discuss specifics, he wanted me to emphasize that this is not a takeover or acquisition. He's interested in preserving the character and community role of Miller's Diner while helping it reach its full potential. Frank leaned back in the booth, clearly processing this unexpected turn. What kind of investment are we talking about? David leaned forward, his demeanor becoming more businesslike, but retaining the warmth Sarah had observed during their previous conversation. Frank, if I may, Sarah told me something during our last conversation that really stuck with me. She mentioned that Elena organized a fundraiser here to help a family whose house had burned down. Frank nodded. I remember that. Elena approached me about using the diner as a collection point for donations. She coordinated with several other local businesses too. That's exactly the kind of community involvement that Elena valued most, David said. She believed that local businesses should be more than just places of commerce. They should be gathering points where people connect and support each other. Sarah watched as David's expression became more animated, clearly passionate about whatever plan he had in mind. What I'm proposing, David continued, is a comprehensive renovation and expansion of Miller's Diner that would allow it to serve as a true community center. Updated kitchen facilities, expanded seating, a private room for community meetings and events, and, most importantly, the resources to regularly host charitable activities and community programs. Frank's jaw dropped slightly. That sounds expensive. Jennifer Chun consulted her notes. The preliminary estimate for the renovation is approximately $2 million. Mr. Morrison is prepared to cover the entire cost, with some specific conditions. $2 million? Frank repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. The conditions are important, David said, leaning forward. First, you would retain complete ownership and operational control of the diner. This is not a business partnership. It's a gift with strings attached designed to honor Elena's memory. Sarah felt her heart pounding as she began to understand the scope of what David was proposing. The second condition, David continued, is that the renovated diner would commit to hosting at least one community service event per month. This could be fundraisers for local families in need, free meals for seniors, educational workshops, or any other activity that brings people together for positive purposes. And the third condition, Jennifer Chen added, is that Sarah Jenkins would be promoted to Community Outreach Coordinator, with a salary commensurate with that responsibility to organize and oversee these community programs. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. I'm sorry, what? David turned to her with a gentle smile. Sarah, in our conversation the other day, I was struck by how much you knew about your customers, how much you cared about their stories and their struggles. Elena always said that the best community organizers were people who genuinely saw and valued everyone they encountered. But I don't have any experience with that kind of work, Sarah protested. You have something more valuable than formal experience, David replied. You have authentic care for people and a natural ability to make them feel valued. Those are the qualities Elena looked for when she mentored new teachers. Frank was still processing the magnitude of the offer. David, I have to ask, why? Why would you invest this kind of money in a small diner in a town you don't even live in anymore? David was quiet for a moment, looking around the familiar space where his wife had found such comfort. Frank, losing Elena taught me something important about grief. For the past 3 years, I've been trying to honor her memory by preserving it, keeping her belongings exactly as she left them, visiting her grave regularly, looking at photos. But that's not really honoring her life. That's just trying to hold on to what's gone. He gestured around the diner. Elena didn't want to be remembered. She wanted to make a difference. She wanted to create connections between people and build communities where everyone felt valued. This project isn't about memorializing Elena. It's about continuing her work in a place that was important to her. Sarah found herself wiping away tears. David, this is incredibly generous, but it feels like too much. I'm just a waitress who happened to remember your wife's coffee order. You're someone who treated my wife with dignity and kindness every time she walked through that door, David corrected gently. You're someone who remembered not just her order, but her stories about her students. You're someone who made Elena feel like she mattered, and that matters to me more than you could possibly know. Jennifer Chen looked at her watch. I know this is a lot to process. We're not asking for an immediate decision, but we would need an answer within the next week to begin the planning process. Frank rubbed his temples, clearly overwhelmed. I need to understand the practical aspects. Would I still run the day-to-day operations? Would my current employees keep their jobs? Absolutely, David assured him. In fact, part of the renovation budget includes raises for all current employees and the ability to hire additional staff as needed. We would also establish an annual budget for the community programs so that the charitable activities don't impact the diner's profitability. And if I wanted to sell the diner at some point in the future? Jennifer Chun answered this one. You would have complete freedom to sell, with the understanding that the new owner would need to agree to continue the community programming aspect. We would structure the legal agreement to protect both your interests and the ongoing mission. Sarah looked around the diner, trying to imagine it transformed into the community center David was describing. The vision was beautiful, but it felt surreal that such a dramatic change could stem from one conversation about Elena's herbal tea and wheat toast. Can I ask you something personal, David? Sarah said quietly. Of course. Are you doing this because you think it's what Elena would have wanted, or because it's helping you deal with your grief? David considered her question seriously. Both, I think. But, mostly, I'm doing it because talking to you the other day reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Elena didn't just talk about making the world better, she actually did it, one person at a time, one small act of kindness at a time. I've been so focused on big business deals and major philanthropic initiatives that I'd lost sight of the power of local, personal connections. He paused, looking directly at Sarah. Elena saw potential in people and helped them find ways to use their gifts. I think she would have seen something special in you, Sarah, and I think she would have loved the idea of this diner becoming a place where that kind of recognition and encouragement happened regularly. Frank cleared his throat. I have to be honest, this sounds like a dream come true, but I'm a practical man. What's the catch? There's always a catch. David laughed, the first truly light-hearted sound Sarah had heard from him. Frank, I appreciate your skepticism. The only catch is that this project will require genuine commitment from you and your team. Running community programs alongside a restaurant is more work than just serving food. But, based on what Sarah told me about the fundraiser Elena organized here, I think this community is ready for something like this. Jennifer Chen added, we would also provide training and ongoing support for the community programming aspect. Mr. Morrison has worked with several similar projects, and we've learned what works and what doesn't. As the meeting continued, Sarah found herself moving from shock to genuine excitement. The idea of organizing programs that could help families like the one Elena had supported, of creating a space where people could connect and support each other, it resonated with something deep inside her. If we did this, Sarah said slowly, what would be the first community program? David smiled. That would be entirely up to you. What do you think Millbrook needs most? Sarah thought about her regular customers, about the struggles she witnessed daily. There are a lot of single parents in this town who work multiple jobs. Maybe we could start with free childcare during parent-teacher conferences, or homework help for kids whose parents work evening shifts. Those are exactly the kinds of programs Elena would have loved, David said approvingly. Frank looked at Sarah with new appreciation. You've really thought about this. I think about our customers all the time, Sarah admitted. You see people's lives when you serve them food regularly. You notice when someone's struggling, when they're celebrating, when they need a friendly face. Jennifer Chun was taking notes. That kind of observational skill and natural empathy would be invaluable in community outreach work. As the meeting drew to a close, David stood and shook hands with both Frank and Sarah. Take the time you need to discuss this and make your decision. Jennifer will leave her contact information, and please don't hesitate to call with any questions. David, Sarah said as he prepared to leave, thank you. Whether we end up doing this or not, thank you for trusting us with something so meaningful to Elena's memory. Thank you for giving me hope that her legacy can continue in ways I never imagined, David replied. After David and Jennifer left, Frank and Sarah sat in stunned silence for several minutes, watching the black sedan disappear down Main Street. Sarah, Frank finally said, did that really just happen? I think so, Sarah replied, though part of her still couldn't quite believe it. $2 million to renovate our diner and turn it into a community center, with you as the coordinator of community programs. It's incredible, Frank. And terrifying. Frank nodded thoughtfully. What do you think Elena would say about all this? Word traveled fast in a small town like Millbrook. By Monday morning, the entire community seemed to know about David Morrison's incredible offer to transform Miller's Diner. Sarah arrived for work to find a small crowd gathered outside, and the phone had been ringing nonstop since Frank opened at 6. The reactions were mixed, as they often were when change came to small communities. Some residents were excited about the possibilities, while others were suspicious of outside money and worried about losing the simple charm that made Miller special. Sarah found herself fielding questions and concerns throughout her shift, trying to explain something she was still processing herself. Mrs. Henderson, her regular coffee customer, sat in her usual booth with a worried expression. Sarah, dear, you're not going to get too fancy for us old customers, are you? I've been coming here for 15 years for the same coffee and blueberry muffin. Mrs. Henderson, Sarah said gently, nothing about your experience here is going to change. You'll still get your coffee exactly how you like it. And Martha will still make those muffins from the same recipe she's used for years. We're just adding services, not changing what already works. Tommy Rodriguez, the mechanic, had concerns about the community programs. I heard something about free meals for seniors. That sounds like charity, and most folks around here don't like feeling like they need handouts. Sarah had thought about this exact issue over the weekend. Tommy, the way I see it, these programs aren't about charity, they're about community. Like when the fire department has their annual pancake breakfast, or when the church has potluck dinners. It's neighbors taking care of neighbors. By Wednesday, Frank had made the decision to accept David Morrison's offer. The legal paperwork began immediately, and Jennifer Chun arranged for architects and designers to visit Millbrook to assess the current space and begin planning the renovation. Sarah was amazed by the level of detail and care that went into every aspect of the planning process. Rather than imposing a generic design, the team spent hours talking to Frank, Sarah, and longtime customers about what made Miller's Diner special. They measured everything, photographed every corner, and took notes about traffic patterns and customer preferences. The lead architect, a woman named Rebecca Torres, had extensive experience with community spaces. She sat in different booths throughout the day, observing how people used the space and what worked well about the existing layout. The goal, Rebecca explained to Sarah during one of their planning sessions, is to enhance what you already have while adding new capabilities. We want someone who hasn't been here in a year to walk in and immediately feel like they're home, just with more options for how they can connect with their community. Sarah was particularly impressed with how the team incorporated Elena's memory into the design without making it feel like a memorial. Rebecca showed her plans for a small library corner with comfortable chairs and shelves of books that could be borrowed freely, a nod to Elena's love of reading and education. There would also be a bulletin board where community members could post notices about everything from job opportunities to items for sale to requests for help. Elena used to say that information was power, but only if it was shared, Sarah told Rebecca. She was always connecting people, letting one parent know about a babysitter another parent recommended, or telling someone about a job opening she'd heard about. That's exactly the kind of organic community building we want to facilitate, Rebecca replied, making notes. The space should encourage those natural connections. The renovation timeline was ambitious. They planned to close for 6 weeks during the traditionally slow period in late fall. Frank was nervous about losing income during that time, but David had insisted on covering all lost revenue in addition to the renovation costs. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, Frank confided to Sarah one afternoon as they reviewed the design plans. This is too generous. Too good to be true. Sarah had wondered the same thing, but her research into David Morrison's background had revealed a pattern of similar projects. He had funded community centers, supported educational initiatives, and invested in small businesses across the region, always with the same approach: generous support with minimal interference, allowing local people to maintain control while providing resources for bigger impact. I think he's genuine, Frank. I think losing Elena taught him something about what really matters, and he's trying to use his resources to continue the kind of work she did. 2 weeks into the planning process, Sarah received an unexpected call. Jennifer Chin asked if she would be willing to visit one of David's other community investment projects to see how similar programs worked in practice. It's not necessary for the legal agreement, Jennifer explained, but David thought it might help you feel more confident about the community coordinator role. Sarah had never traveled far from Millbrook, and the idea of visiting a project in the state capital was both exciting and nerve-wracking. Frank readily gave her time off, recognizing that this research would benefit everyone. The project Jennifer took her to see was called Riverside Community Kitchen, located in a renovated warehouse in a working-class neighborhood. Like Miller's Diner, it had started as a simple restaurant that David had transformed into a community hub. The manager, Carlos Martinez, had a background similar to Sarah's. He had been a line cook when David first invested in the restaurant, and had grown into the community coordinator role over time. The key, Carlos explained as he gave Sarah a tour, is remembering that you're not running programs for the community. You're helping the community run programs for itself. People know what they need better than any outside expert. Sarah watched as Carlos facilitated a meeting between local parents who were organizing carpools for after-school activities. His role seemed to be creating space for connections to happen naturally, then providing logistical support when needed. How do you decide which programs to support? Sarah asked. I don't really. I listen to what people are asking for, and I help them figure out how to make it happen. Last month, a group of teenagers wanted somewhere to practice their band. We worked with them to soundproof one of our back rooms, and now they play a free concert here every Friday night. The teenagers Carlos mentioned were setting up their equipment as he spoke. Sarah was struck by how seamlessly the restaurant operated alongside the community activities. Regular customers were eating lunch while the band conducted their sound check, and everyone seemed comfortable with the relaxed, inclusive atmosphere. What's the biggest challenge? Sarah asked. Carlos thought for a moment. Making sure programs actually serve the people they're designed to help. It's easy to create programs that look good on paper, but don't meet real needs. You have to stay connected to your community and be willing to adjust when something isn't working. That afternoon, Sarah observed a homework help session for elementary school children. Volunteer tutors, mostly high school students and retirees, worked with kids whose parents were still at work. The program had started when a single mother asked if her son could do his homework in a back booth while waiting for her shift to end. Now we have 15 kids who come regularly, and a waiting list of volunteers who want to help, Carlos explained. It grew because it met a real need, and the community embraced it. On the drive back to Millbrook, Jennifer Chin asked Sarah about her impressions. It's amazing, Sarah said honestly. But I'm also terrified. Carlos has been doing this for 3 years, and he makes it look easy. What if I can't figure out what our community needs? Sarah, you've been observing and responding to your community's needs for 6 years, Jennifer pointed out. Every time you remember a customer's order, every time you ask about someone's family, Every time you notice when a regular customer seems upset, you're doing community care work. But those are small things. Small things add up to big impact. David told me about your conversation regarding Elena's fundraiser for the family whose house burned down. That started as a small observation, Elena noticing that a family needed help, and grew into something that made a real difference. As they returned to Millbrook, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and responsibility settling over her. The opportunity David was offering wasn't just about a job change. It was about stepping into a role where she could help strengthen the connections that made her community special. That evening, Sarah called her sister in the city to tell her about the developments. Maria had been encouraging Sarah to leave Millbrook for years, convinced that small-town life was limiting her potential. "Wait," Maria said, clearly confused. "You're telling me that a billionaire walked into your diner, recognized that you had treated his dead wife nicely, and decided to give you a $2 million renovation and a career change? When you put it like that, it does sound unbelievable," Sarah admitted. "It sounds like a fairy tale. Are you sure this is real?" Sarah looked around her small apartment, thinking about the architectural plans spread across her kitchen table and the business cards from contractors and designers who would begin work in a few weeks. "It's real, Maria. And it's happening because Elena Rodriguez was the kind of person who made everyone feel valued, and somehow that created connections that are still making a difference 3 years after her death." "But, Sarah, what if it doesn't work out? What if you're not good at this community coordinator thing? You've never done anything like it before." "You're right, I haven't. But I've been paying attention to this community for 6 years, and I care about the people here. Maybe that's enough to start with. And what if this David Morrison changes his mind? Rich people can be unpredictable." Sarah had worried about this too, but something about David's demeanor and the thoroughness of the legal arrangements convinced her that he was committed to seeing the project through. "I think he needs this project as much as our community does," Sarah said. "I think helping Elena's memory live on in practical ways is part of how he's learning to carry his grief." "You always were too trusting," Maria said, but her tone had softened. "But I have to admit, if this works out, it sounds like an amazing opportunity." After they hung up, Sarah walked downtown to see Miller's Diner in the evening quiet. Frank had left the lights on in the front windows, and she could see the familiar booths and counter through the glass. In 6 weeks, this space would be transformed, expanded, and equipped to serve the community in ways none of them had ever imagined. But, as exciting as the physical changes would be, Sarah was most intrigued by the human connections that would develop. The homework help sessions, the community meetings, the fundraising events. All of it centered on the simple idea that people needed spaces to come together and support each other. Elena had understood this instinctively. She had seen Miller's Diner not just as a place to grab breakfast before school, but as a gathering point where she could check on people's well-being and facilitate connections. Now, Elena's husband was investing in expanding that vision, trusting Sarah to help make it happen. Standing outside the diner, Sarah felt the weight of that trust. But, for the first time since David's initial visit, she also felt confident that she was ready for the challenge. She had spent years watching and listening and caring about her community. Now she would have the resources and the platform to turn that care into action. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Elena's former teaching colleagues had heard about the diner project and wanted to express their support. Principal Janet Walsh, a stern but kind woman in her 50s, arrived with 3 other teachers during Sarah's mid-morning break. "Sarah," Principal Walsh said, "we wanted you to know how much this project would have meant to Elena. She always said that the best teaching happened outside the classroom, in places where people felt comfortable being themselves." Elena used to talk about Miller's Diner as an extension of her classroom, added Mrs. Peterson, a retired first-grade teacher. She said she learned more about her students' families by listening to conversations here than she did from any formal assessment. These conversations with Elena's colleagues gave Sarah new insight into the woman whose memory was inspiring such generosity. Elena hadn't just been a good teacher. She had been someone who understood that education and community building were inseparable. The renovation of Miller's Diner began on a crisp October morning. Sarah stood outside with Frank, watching as professional contractors carefully removed the old sign that had hung above the entrance for 20 years. The weathered letters spelling Miller's Diner had become so familiar that seeing them lowered to the ground felt surreal. "Last chance to change our minds," Frank joked, though Sarah could hear the nervousness in his voice. "I think we passed that point when the construction crew arrived at dawn," Sarah replied, watching as workers began setting up equipment. Rebecca Torres, the lead architect, approached them with her tablet and hard hat. "Are you ready for the grand tour of what this place will look like in 6 weeks?" They spent the morning walking through the space as Rebecca explained each phase of the renovation. The dining area would be expanded into the adjacent empty storefront that had been vacant for 2 years. The kitchen would be completely modernized with equipment capable of handling both regular service and large community events. Most excitingly, there would be a flexible community room that could host everything from meetings to children's programs to small celebrations. The community room is designed to feel separate from the restaurant when needed, but it can also open up for larger events, Rebecca explained, showing them where movable walls would create different configurations. "We're installing a small stage area for presentations, performances, or even karaoke nights." Sarah tried to envision the space filled with people, children doing homework while their parents finished work, seniors gathering for morning coffee and conversation, teenagers practicing music or organizing community service projects. The possibilities seemed endless. 3 days into the renovation, Sarah received a call that changed everything she thought she knew about David Morrison's connection to Millbrook. "Sarah, this is Margaret Hoffman from the Millbrook Historical Society. I hope you don't mind me calling, but I've been doing some research about your benefactor, and I think there's something important you should know." Margaret was a retired librarian who had spent decades documenting the history of their small town. If anyone knew hidden stories about Millbrook, it would be her. "What kind of research?" Sarah asked. "Well, when I heard about David Morrison's generous donation, I decided to look into his family background. The name Morrison was familiar, and I wanted to see if he had any historical connections to our town." Sarah felt a flutter of anticipation. "What did you find?" "Sarah, David Morrison isn't just Elena's widower who happened to be successful in business. His family has deep roots in Millbrook that go back 3 generations. His great-grandfather, Thomas Morrison, founded Morrison Agricultural Supply in 1924. It was one of the biggest employers in town until it closed in 1987. Sarah's mind raced. Morrison Agricultural Supply had been before her time, but she had heard older residents mention it. The building that housed it had been torn down years ago, but she remembered Frank talking about how its closure had hurt the local economy. "There's more," Margaret continued. "David's grandfather, Robert Morrison, served as mayor of Millbrook from 1952 to 1960. He was instrumental in bringing electricity to the rural areas around town and establishing our volunteer fire department." "Does David know that you know this?" Sarah asked. "I doubt it. This information isn't exactly secret, but you'd have to know where to look. I spent 3 hours going through old newspaper archives and city records to piece it together." After hanging up with Margaret, Sarah sat in her car outside the construction site, processing this revelation. David Morrison hadn't just randomly chosen Millbrook as a place to honor his wife's memory. This was his family's hometown. His investment in the community wasn't just about Elena's connection to the diner. It was about returning to his roots and revitalizing a place his family had helped build. But why hadn't he mentioned this during their conversations? Sarah thought back to their discussions about Elena's love for small towns and community connections. Had David been drawn to Millbrook specifically because of his family history, or had Elena's fondness for the town been entirely separate from his ancestral ties? That evening, Sarah called Jennifer Chun to ask if it would be appropriate to bring up this family history with David. "I think he'd appreciate knowing that you've learned about it," Jennifer said. "He's a private person, but he's also proud of his family's legacy. He probably didn't mention it initially because he wanted the focus to be on Elena, not on his own connections to the town. Should I wait until he visits again, or would it be okay to call him directly? Why don't you write him a letter? He appreciates thoughtful, personal communication more than quick phone calls." Sarah spent 2 hours that night crafting a letter to David. She thanked him again for the incredible opportunity, updated him on the renovation progress, and then gently mentioned Margaret's research and what it had revealed about his family's history in Millbrook. "I wanted you to know," she wrote, "that learning about your family's contributions to our community makes your current generosity even more meaningful. You're not just honoring Elena's memory. You're continuing a family tradition of investing in Millbrook's future." 3 days later, Sarah received a phone call from David himself. "Sarah, thank you for your letter. You're right that I should have mentioned my family connection to Millbrook earlier. I suppose I was worried that it would complicate the narrative or make people think I had ulterior motives for the investment. David, if anything, it makes your commitment more credible. People have been wondering if this is some kind of elaborate tax write-off or publicity stunt. Knowing that your family helped build this town makes it clear that you have genuine reasons for wanting to see it thrive. My great-grandfather would have loved what we're doing with the diner," David said, his voice warm with memory. He always believed that businesses should serve their communities, not just their owners. That's how Morrison Agricultural Supply operated. They provided good jobs, supported local charities, and helped farmers succeed. "What happened to the company?" Sarah asked gently. "Consolidation in the agricultural industry made it difficult for smaller suppliers to compete. My grandfather sold it in the 1980s rather than watch it fail slowly. He always regretted that the sale meant job losses for so many families in Millbrook." Sarah began to understand the deeper significance of David's investment. "This project is partly about making amends for that loss, isn't it?" "Partly, yes. But it's more about carrying forward the values that built my family's success in the first place. Community investment, local relationships, using resources to create opportunities for others. Elena must have loved learning about your family's history here." "She did. In fact, it was Elena who first suggested that I should do something meaningful in Millbrook. She said that prosperity came with responsibility, and that our success should benefit the places and people that shaped us." This conversation gave Sarah an entirely new perspective on the diner project. It wasn't just a generous gesture from a grieving widower. It was the culmination of a family legacy of community investment, combined with a beloved wife's vision for how resources should be used to strengthen communities. As the renovation progressed, Sarah shared this information with Frank and some of the longtime residents who remembered the Morrison family businesses. The revelation created a new level of excitement about the project. "Thomas Morrison used to give interest-free loans to farmers who were struggling," recalled Harold Peterson, whose family had farmed in the area for decades. "My grandfather told me that Morrison Agricultural Supply kept half the farms in this county afloat during the Depression. Mayor Robert Morrison was the one who convinced the state to route Highway 34 through Millbrook instead of around it," added Betty Jameson, who had lived in town her entire 83 years. "That highway brought commerce and visitors that kept our downtown alive." These stories helped Sarah understand that David's investment wasn't just generous. It was part of a multi-generational commitment to Millbrook's prosperity. Elena had been the catalyst that reminded him of his family's values, and her death had motivated him to act on them. 2 weeks before the planned reopening, David made another surprise visit to check on the renovation progress. Sarah was amazed by the transformation of the space. The expanded dining area was bright and welcoming, with new booths that echoed the classic diner aesthetic while providing more comfort and accessibility. The community room was versatile and inviting, with warm lighting and flexible furniture arrangements. But the detail that moved Sarah most was a subtle one. A small plaque near the entrance that read, "In memory of Elena Rodriguez Morrison, teacher and community builder, and in honor of the Morrison family's legacy of service to Millbrook." Elena would have insisted that her name not be prominent, David explained, noticing Sarah's attention to the plaque. "But I wanted there to be some acknowledgement of what inspired this project." "It's perfect," Sarah said. "Meaningful but not overwhelming." They walked through the renovated space together, with David asking detailed questions about Sarah's plans for the community programs. "I've been talking to Carlos Martinez at Riverside Community Kitchen," Sarah explained, "and I think our first program should be homework help for elementary school children. Principal Walsh has already lined up volunteer tutors, and we have 12 families who are interested." "That sounds like exactly the kind of program Elena would have supported," David said approvingly. "I also want to start a monthly community dinner where people can suggest new programs or discuss local issues. Nothing formal or political, just neighbors talking to neighbors. Community dinners were something my great-grandfather used to organize, David said with a smile. He called them barn raisings for ideas, bringing people together to solve problems collectively. As they toured the new kitchen facilities, Sarah marveled at the professional-grade equipment that would allow them to prepare meals for large groups. David, can I ask you something personal? Of course. How are you doing? With Elena's death, I mean. This project seems like it's been healing for you, but I imagine it's also brought up a lot of difficult memories. David paused, leaning against one of the new stainless steel counters. You're right that it's been healing. For 3 years, I tried to honor Elena by preserving everything exactly as she left it. But that was about my grief, not about her life. This project feels like the first thing I've done that truly honors who she was and what she cared about. Do you think she would have approved of the renovation? I think she would have been excited about the possibilities and worried about whether we were being too extravagant, David said with a laugh. She always wanted to make sure resources were used responsibly, not just generously. Well, based on the community response, I think she would be proud. People are already organizing programs, and we haven't even officially reopened yet. The discovery came during the final week of renovation, when workers were installing new flooring in what would become the community room. Behind a section of old baseboard, they found a small wooden box that had apparently been placed there decades ago and forgotten. Frank called Sarah immediately when the construction foreman brought the box to his attention. Sarah, you need to see this. The workers found something hidden in the wall, and I think it might be connected to the Morrison family. Sarah arrived within minutes, her curiosity piqued by the mystery. The box was about the size of a shoebox, made of dark wood that had aged beautifully over the years. There was no lock, just a simple brass latch that opened easily. Inside, they found a collection of items that told a remarkable story. There were photographs, letters, newspaper clippings, and documents that spanned nearly 60 years of Millbrook's history. But what made Sarah's breath catch was the top item, a photograph of a young woman who looked remarkably similar to Elena. Frank picked up the photograph carefully, examining the woman's face. Sarah, this looks like Elena, but the clothing and hairstyle are from the 1960s. And look at the back. Written in faded ink on the back of the photograph was Maria Santos, Millbrook Elementary School, 1967. A teacher who changed everything. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. Frank, Elena's maiden name was Santos. This must be a relative. They carefully examined the other contents of the box. There were letters addressed to Miss Santos from former students, thanking her for her kindness and encouragement. There were newspaper clippings about educational programs she had organized, including a free lunch program for students from low-income families and an after-school tutoring initiative. But the most significant discovery was a formal letter dated 1968, written on Morrison Agricultural Supply letterhead. It was from Robert Morrison, David's grandfather, to Maria Santos, thanking her for her extraordinary dedication to the children of our community, and informing her that Morrison Agricultural Supply would be providing funding for her innovative educational programs. Sarah, Frank said, his voice filled with wonder. Elena wasn't just randomly drawn to Millbrook. Her family had a history here too, and the Morrison family had supported her relatives' work decades before David even met Elena. Sarah sat down heavily in one of the new chairs, overwhelmed by the implications. This means that Elena's connection to this community and David's family's tradition of supporting education go back much further than anyone realized. They continued examining the box contents, finding more evidence of Maria Santos's impact on Millbrook. There were photographs of community events she had organized, handwritten notes from parents expressing gratitude for her work with their children, and documentation of collaborative projects between the school and local businesses, including Morrison Agricultural Supply. The final item in the box was a leather journal filled with Maria Santos's handwriting. Sarah opened it carefully, reading entries that showed a thoughtful educator reflecting on her work and her hopes for the community. One entry, dated April 15, 1969, particularly caught Sarah's attention. Today I met with young Robert Morrison to discuss expanding the tutoring program. He has his grandfather's heart for community service, and I believe the Morrison family will continue to be a blessing to this town for generations to come. I pray that someday, other young teachers will find their way to Millbrook and carry on this work of caring for all children, regardless of their circumstances. Sarah felt tears forming as she read Maria's words. Frank, Elena didn't just happen to love Millbrook and community service. She was literally continuing her family's legacy here, probably without even knowing the full extent of the connection. Frank was studying a newspaper clipping about Maria Santos's retirement in 1985. Look at this, Sarah. It says that Maria Santos influenced over 1,000 children during her career in Millbrook, and that many of her former students became teachers themselves, spreading her philosophy of education throughout the region. Elena was carrying forward more than just her own values, Sarah realized. She was part of a multi-generational tradition of educators who believed in the power of community care. They decided to call David immediately to share their discovery. His reaction was one of stunned amazement. Maria Santos, David repeated when Sarah told him what they had found. Elena mentioned her Aunt Maria many times. She said Maria was the teacher who inspired her to go into education. But she never told me that Maria had worked in Millbrook. Elena thought the connection between us and your town was just a beautiful coincidence. David, there's more, Sarah said, then read him the journal entry about his grandfather. When she finished, David was quiet for a long time. My grandfather used to tell me stories about a remarkable teacher in Millbrook who had revolutionized how the community thought about education. He never mentioned her name, just called her the teacher who changed everything. I never made the connection. So Elena was drawn to Millbrook not just because she fell in love with David Morrison, Frank said, but because her family had deep roots here too. It explains so much about Elena's immediate connection to your town, David said, his voice filled with wonder. She always said that Millbrook felt like coming home, but she attributed it to the community's warmth. She never knew that her aunt had helped shape that very warmth through decades of educational innovation. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the beautiful complexity of the connections they were uncovering. David, this changes everything about how we understand this project. We're not just honoring Elena's memory or continuing your family's tradition of community service. We're bringing together two family legacies that have been intertwined for generations. What do you think we should do with Maria Santos's box? Frank asked. I think it needs to be part of the diner's community space, David said without hesitation. Elena would have loved knowing about her aunt's work in Millbrook, and I think both of their stories deserve to be preserved and shared. Sarah had an idea. What if we create a small heritage display in the community room? We could include information about Maria Santos's educational innovations, the Morrison family's business contributions, and Elena's continuing work as a teacher. Several elderly residents remembered Maria Santos fondly and had stories about her impact on their education and their children's education. Betty Jameson, who had lived in Millbrook her entire life, brought in a photograph of herself as a young mother, standing with Maria Santos and other volunteers at a community picnic that Maria had organized in 1975. Miss Santos believed that schools and communities should work together, Betty explained to Sarah. She was always organizing events that brought families together, just like what you're planning to do with the new diner programs. Harold Peterson revealed that his daughter had been one of Maria Santos's students and had become a teacher herself, partially inspired by Maria's example. Maria Santos didn't just teach reading and arithmetic, Harold said. She taught children that they mattered, that their dreams were valid, and that education was a path to making their community better. Principal Janet Walsh was fascinated by the educational philosophy documented in Maria Santos's journal. Her ideas about integrated community education were decades ahead of their time, Janet told Sarah. She was implementing concepts that we're just now recognizing as best practices. The grand reopening of Miller's Diner was scheduled for a Saturday morning, exactly 6 weeks after the renovation had begun. Sarah arrived early, feeling nervous but excited about the day ahead. The physical transformation was remarkable. The expanded space felt both modern and timeless, with the classic diner aesthetic enhanced by contemporary comfort and accessibility. The community room was bright and welcoming, with the heritage display prominently, but tastefully positioned near the entrance. But what moved Sarah most was seeing the connections between past and present that the renovation had revealed and strengthened. David Morrison was honoring his wife's memory while continuing his family's tradition of community investment. Sarah was stepping into a role that connected her own values with a legacy of educational innovation. And the town of Millbrook was rediscovering its identity as a place where businesses, schools, and families worked together for everyone's benefit. The reopening event exceeded everyone's expectations. Nearly the entire town showed up, along with visitors from neighboring communities who had heard about the project. David Morrison cut the ribbon, but he insisted that Sarah and Frank stand beside him for the ceremony. This project represents the best of what happens when individual kindness meets community vision, David said in his brief remarks. Elena Rodriguez Morrison believed that every person deserved to feel valued and supported. Her aunt, Maria Santos, dedicated her career to that same principle. My family has been privileged to invest in this community for nearly a century. Today, we celebrate not just the reopening of a beloved diner, but the continuation of values that have made Millbrook special for generations. The first community program began that very afternoon. Principal Walsh had organized a reading circle for children, with volunteer high school students serving as reading buddies for younger kids. Sarah watched as the community room filled with families, seeing the vision she had talked about with David finally coming to life. Mrs. Henderson ordered her usual coffee and blueberry muffin, but she also signed up to volunteer for the senior outreach program that Sarah had planned for the following week. Tommy Rodriguez, the mechanic, announced that he wanted to organize a monthly Fix-It clinic where people could bring small appliances and household items for free repair, both to help neighbors and to teach young people practical skills. The teenagers who had been skeptical about the changes were impressed by the sound system in the community room and immediately started planning an open mic night. As the day wound down, Sarah found herself standing with David and Frank in the newly renovated space, watching families and friends enjoying dinner together. Elena would have loved this, David said quietly, his eyes taking in the scene around them. Both Elenas, Sarah corrected gently. Elena Rodriguez Morrison and her Aunt Maria Santos. They would both be proud to see their values continuing through new generations. Frank raised his coffee cup in a toast. To the women who taught us that community care isn't just about helping people in need. It's about recognizing that everyone has something to contribute and creating spaces where those contributions can flourish. As Sarah looked around the transformed diner, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had started with her recognizing a tattoo and sharing memories of a beloved customer. But it had grown into something much more significant. The discovery of multi-generational connections between families dedicated to community service, and the creation of a space that honored those connections while building new ones. The simple act of treating Elena Rodriguez Morrison with kindness and attention during her regular visits had set in motion a chain of events that revealed the deep roots both families had in Millbrook. Elena's love for the town hadn't been coincidental. It had been an intuitive recognition of her family's legacy there. David's investment hadn't been just about grief and generosity. It had been about returning to the values that had shaped his own family's success. But, perhaps most importantly, Sarah had discovered her own capacity to facilitate community connections and support programs that made a real difference in people's lives. The waitress who had simply paid attention to her customers' stories had become a community leader entrusted with significant resources and responsibility. As the last customers of the evening finished their meals and headed home, Sarah realized that the most beautiful aspect of the entire project was how it had honored the past while creating new possibilities for the future. Maria Santos's educational innovations from the 1960s were inspiring community programs in the 2020s. Robert Morrison's business philosophy from the 1950s was guiding his grandson's philanthropic investments. And Elena Rodriguez Morrison's daily acts of kindness were continuing to generate ripple effects of care and connection. The transformed Miller's Diner stood as proof that individual kindness, when combined with community vision and adequate resources, could create changes that honored the past while building hope for the future. Elena's memory had become a bridge connecting generations of service, and her legacy would continue to grow through every program organized. every connection facilitated, and every person who felt valued and supported in the space that her love had helped create. The black waitress who had been stunned by a billionaire's tattoo had become the keeper of a legacy that was much larger and more beautiful than anyone had initially understood. And, in the process, she had discovered that as they finished their tour, David handed Sarah a folder containing the official documents for her new position as Community Outreach Coordinator, along with information about the ongoing budget for programs and her salary, which was significantly higher than what she had been making as a waitress. Sarah, I want you to know that this role can evolve however makes sense for you and the community. If you discover that Millbrook needs something we haven't thought of, you have the authority and the budget to make it happen. That's both exciting and terrifying, Sarah admitted. The best opportunities usually are, David replied. Elena always said that the magic happened when people were brave enough to try something they weren't sure they could do. As the reopening date approached, Sarah realized that the renovated Miller's Diner represented something much larger than a successful business investment. It was proof that individual kindness, Elena's genuine care for her students and community, Sarah's attention to her customers' needs, David's commitment to honoring his wife's values, could create ripple effects that transformed entire communities. The simple act of recognizing Elena's portrait in David's tattoo had revealed connections between past and present, between family legacy and personal grief, between individual loss and community hope. Elena's memory was becoming a bridge that connected David's resources with Millbrook's needs, creating something that honored both his family's history and his wife's vision for how communities should care for each other. But the biggest surprise was yet to come, a discovery during the final week of renovation that would reveal the true depth of Elena's impact on Millbrook and the stunning way her influence had shaped events that no one, not even David, had fully understood. If you need volunteers for your programs, Principal Walsh offered. I know dozens of current and retired teachers who would love to help. Elena inspired a lot of people during her time here. As the renovation date approached, Sarah realized that David Morrison's investment was already paying dividends. The anticipation of the project had sparked conversations throughout Millbrook about community needs and possibilities. People were thinking differently about what their small town could become. The simple act of recognizing a tattoo and sharing memories had set in motion something much larger than Sarah had ever imagined. Elena's legacy was about to expand far beyond her former students and casual coffee conversations, growing into something that could strengthen the entire community. But the most surprising discovery was still to come, a revelation about the true scope of David Morrison's connection to Millbrook that would leave everyone stunned and forever change how they understood Elena's impact on the world around her. Sarah smiled, remembering the gentle teacher who had always asked about her day and left encouraging notes with generous tips. I think she would say that the best way to honor someone's memory is to keep doing the work they cared about. Then, I guess we have our answer, Frank said. As Sarah prepared to finish her shift, she realized that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't have imagined when she tied her apron strings that Tuesday morning. The simple act of recognizing a tattoo and sharing memories of a beloved customer had opened a door to possibilities she never could have dreamed of. But, more than the professional opportunity, she felt honored to be entrusted with continuing Elena's work of bringing people together and making everyone feel valued. It was a responsibility she didn't take lightly, and one that would challenge her to grow in ways that would surprise even herself. The transformation of Miller's Diner was about to begin, but the real transformation would be in the lives it touched and the community it would help create. As David left the diner, Sarah watched him walk down the main street, his shoulders somehow straighter than when he had arrived. She had the strange feeling that this encounter had been important for both of them, though she couldn't quite articulate why. What she didn't know was that David Morrison was indeed one of the wealthiest men in the state, a tech entrepreneur whose companies had revolutionized several industries. What she also didn't know was that this seemingly chance encounter would set in motion a series of events that would change not only her life, but the lives of everyone in the small town of Millbrook. As she cleared his table, Sarah found a generous tip and a brief note. Thank you for keeping Elena's memory alive with kindness. She would have loved seeing the person you've become. Sarah smiled, tucking the note into her apron pocket, unaware that this simple act of human connection would soon reveal the true depth of David Morrison's character and the stunning way he chose to honor his late wife's memory.